think about the last time you felt genuinely productive. You can probably conjure it clearly. The momentum, the sense of forward motion, the particular satisfaction of something getting done. Now try to name what you actually produced that day. Not the emails, not the meetings, not the tasks you moved around. What exists in the world as a result of that day that did not exist before it? For a lot of people, that question gets uncomfortable quickly. This is not about laziness. It is not about willpower or discipline or any of the usual suspects that get blamed when productivity falls short. It is about something more fundamental and more unsettling. The fact that your brain has a vested interest in believing you are productive, regardless of whether you actually are. And it is very good at making that case to you, reliably, consistently, across your entire life. There is a particular cognitive fog that settles over people who are doing a great deal without making much real progress. They feel the effort. They register the hours. They go home tired. The tiredness is genuine. The engagement is genuine. But the output, the actual movement towards something that matters, is often a fraction of what the brain has credited itself with. This gap between the feeling of productivity and the fact of it is not a personal failing. It is a feature of how minds work. Understanding it honestly is one of the more disturbing things you can do. The concept at the center of this is metacognition. The mind's capacity to think about its own thinking. You might assume this is reliable, that the part of your brain watching the other parts has some kind of privileged access to the truth. It doesn't. What research consistently shows is that humans are systematically, predictably wrong about the quality and quantity of their own cognitive work, not randomly wrong, systematically wrong, in a specific direction. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky documented one version of this in 1979. With what they called the planning fallacy, when people estimate how long a task will take, they tend to imagine a best-case scenario. No interruptions, no complications, clean execution, and treat that imagined scenario as the likely one. They ignore base rates. They ignore everything that has ever gone wrong before. The brain filters all of that out and presents a clean, optimistic projection as if it were analysis. Kahneman won a Nobel Prize partly for documenting how pervasive this error is, and yet knowing about it does almost nothing to fix it. The illusion persists even in people who understand the research perfectly well. But the planning fallacy is just the entrance. Go deeper and you find something more structural. The brain doesn't only misestimate time, it misattributes effort. It mistakes the feeling of being busy for the experience of being productive. And it does this because at a neurological level the two feel nearly identical. Both involve sustained attention. Both produce fatigue. Both generate a sense of engagement. The brain is not well equipped to distinguish between them in the moment. It can only evaluate from memory. And memory, as we will get to, has its own agenda. There is a phenomenon documented by Bloom and Zygarnik in 1927 that starts to explain the texture of this. Zygarnik was a Soviet psychologist who noticed that waiters in a restaurant remembered incomplete orders better than completed ones. The moment a task was finished, the brain seemed to release it, to stop allocating resources toward it. The unfinished task, by contrast, stayed active, nagging, present in working memory. The Zygarnik effect describes how the mind clings to incompletion as a kind of maintenance signal, but there is a shadow side. It means that completed tasks, especially small ones, produce a disproportionate sense of relief. The brain delivers a small reward the moment something is marked done, independent of whether what was done actually mattered. Watch how this plays out practically. You have a major project due. Instead of working on it, you answer 12 emails. Each email answered produces a tiny hit of completion, a small clearing of the Zygarnik nagging. By the end of the day, you have answered 12 emails and done nothing on the project. The project remains open. It remains nagging. But the day is over, and the brain has, on balance, registered 12 moments of forward motion. It presents this to you as productivity. The feeling is real. What the feeling represents is not. Leon Festinger's work on cognitive dissonance in the 1950s adds another layer. Festinger found that humans are profoundly uncomfortable holding contradictory beliefs simultaneously, and will go to remarkable psychological lengths to resolve the contradiction in their favor. Applied to productivity, this means that if you hold the belief that you are a hard worker, a person who gets things done, and then you encounter evidence that contradicts this, a missed deadline, a project going nowhere, a pile of things you have been avoiding, your brain does not simply update the belief. It defends it. It reframes the evidence. The missed deadline becomes the client's fault, or bad timing, or an external failure. The pile of avoided things gets reclassified as deliberate prioritization. You are not lying to yourself in any conscious sense. The machinery is working exactly as designed. What makes this especially difficult is that the defenses are often partially correct. The client probably did have unreasonable expectations. The pile probably does contain low-priority items. The brain finds the grain of truth and constructs a story around it. And because the grain is real, the story feels real. This is not delusion in the clinical sense. This is ordinary cognition functioning normally. The difference between a person who is systematically self-deceived and one who is not is often simply whether they have built feedback structures honest enough to break through the defense from the outside. Memory compounds all of this. Memory is not a recording device. It is a reconstruction, one heavily influenced by emotional state, by recency, by what story the brain is currently trying to tell about itself. Elizabeth Loftus spent decades documenting how memory is altered by suggestion, by leading questions, by the simple passage of time. What this means for the question of productivity is that at the end of a day, a week, a month, when you try to assess what you have done, you are not retrieving a record. You are constructing a narrative. And narratives tend strongly to be shaped by what you need to believe rather than what happened. The modern office, or the home office, or whatever hybrid version you inhabit, is a particularly fertile environment for a productive feeling activity that doesn't produce much. Meetings are perhaps the clearest example of this. People leave most meetings with a feeling of collective forward motion, of things having been addressed and understood. Research on meeting effectiveness is consistently damning. The psychological experience of participation and the actual outcomes of that participation diverge significantly. The talking, the nodding, the action items written into documents that won't be reopened, all of it generates completion signals, mutual validation, the sensation of work occurring. What changes as a result is usually far less than the meeting felt like it accomplished. This extends to digital behavior in ways that deserve serious attention. The notification check, the email scan, the Slack response. Each is a small Zeigarnik completion, a tiny release of tension. Strung together through a day, they produce an almost continuous low-level feeling of being engaged with work. At the same time, they systematically prevent the kind of sustained, uninterrupted attention that meaningful work actually requires. The brain cannot hold both of these truths comfortably, so it quietly weights the completions and presents you with a version of the day in which you were engaged and responsive and moving forward. The weight of the feeling is real. The productivity it represents is not. The sociologist Arlie Hochschild, writing about workplace dynamics in the 1980s, documented something that applies here. The things that feel most like work are often not the things that produce the most value, and vice versa. The work that flows, that feels almost effortless, tends to get undercounted. The work that grinds, that produces visible strain, gets overcounted. The brain gives more credit to effort than to output. Suffering, or at least discomfort, registers as productivity in a way that ease does not. This is why people who are genuinely skilled at something often feel like they didn't work that hard, and why people working very hard can still feel, vaguely, that they haven't done enough. Now think about this in your own life. Specifically, not in aggregate, not theoretically. What is the thing you have been telling yourself you are working toward? That When you examine the last month honestly, you have not moved meaningfully toward. Most people, when they sit with this question without flinching, find something. A project, a relationship, a habit, an ambition, something described internally as in progress, that is, on actual examination, largely static. The brain has been covering for this, adding up the tangential conversations, the vague plans, the related emails, and presenting them as progress. This is not a metaphor. It is a documented cognitive tendency with a measurable mechanism. The research of David Dunning and Justin Kruger in 1999 is often cited in flattened ways. The Dunning-Kruger effect has become cultural shorthand for stupidity, which misses the actual finding. What they showed was that the skills required to perform a task well are often the same skills required to evaluate one's performance at that task. Incompetence impairs self-assessment, but competence doesn't fully fix this either. High performers tend to underestimate themselves because they assume the task is equally straightforward for others. The upshot is that accurate self-assessment, at any level of ability, is genuinely difficult. The feedback loop between what we do and how we judge what we have done is noisy, self-serving, and slow. So what do you do with this? The answer is probably not more self-monitoring. Research on journaling and behavioral tracking shows mixed results. People who track their behavior often simply get better at rationalizing it within the tracking system. The feedback loop needs to come from outside the system. External accountability, hard deadlines, people who will tell you what they actually observe, not because this is motivating in some inspirational sense, but because the internal assessment cannot override the brain's defenses without external data that doesn't know what verdict it's supposed to reach. There is also a simpler and harder practice: measuring output rather than effort. Not how long you spent on something, or how engaged you felt, or how many things you touched, but what exists in the world as a result of your work that did not exist before it. This is uncomfortable to apply rigorously, because the answer is often much smaller than the effort would suggest. Most effort does not survive into output in a directly visible way. That discomfort is information. But it is probably the most honest signal you will get about where the gap actually lives. There is something philosophically interesting and slightly bleak at the bottom of all this. The brain's tendency to overestimate its own productivity is not a bug in a system designed to track reality accurately. It is a feature of a system designed to maintain function, to keep the animal moving, to protect self-concept from information that would be paralyzing if taken raw. The mechanism that lets you get up after failure and try again is the same mechanism that prevents you from seeing clearly how far from done you actually are. These are not separate systems with separate purposes. They are the same system doing the same thing. What this means is that you cannot simply decide to see yourself clearly and have it be so. The cognitive apparatus doing the seeing is the same one doing the distorting. You can build structures that make the distortion harder to sustain. You can seek out honest feedback and resist the urge to reframe it immediately. You can count outputs instead of hours, and sit with the gap between them without rushing to explain it away. But you cannot audit yourself fully, from the inside. The tools you would need for a perfect audit are kept by the part of the mind that already knows what verdict it prefers. The question is not whether your brain lies to you about how productive you are. It does. Routinely, skillfully, with genuine good intent. The question is what you intend to do in a world where the signal is always slightly corrupted, where the map of your own effort will never align perfectly with the territory of your actual output. This is not a problem to be solved by the right system or the right habit. It is a condition to be navigated carefully, honestly, with appropriate suspicion toward your own most comfortable conclusions.